Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let's start with the geography. Brockville is a city in eastern Ontario, Canada, located on the St. Lawrence River in the Thousand Islands region. If you live in that part of the country, you'll know the name Bob Runciman. He is a man who has been passionate about representing the interests of his constituents at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels for over 45 years. Now retired, he continues that public service as a volunteer board member, overseeing some of the most important tourist attractions in the country. Bob has just released a memoir chronicling his experiences. It's called From Mad Dog to Senator. Here is our conversation with Bob Runciman. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Great. Glad to be with you, Dave.
And I welcome all of those who are listening today, and a reminder that we are recording this episode in mid-July 2023. From Mad Dog to Senator, the name of the book. And it was just published, a few weeks ago it was published. And you're telling me it's doing really well.
Surprisingly, I had no idea, how this would be received. But I had a fellow come on board, my team, if you refer to it as a team, and he's really an expert on how to market a book. And he's been helping me in a significant way. So I think that's probably the difference. If you're just trying to move this thing around by yourself, it's a challenge to say the least. And I have a leg up, I guess, in terms of most folks who self-publish, and that I have some name recognition. And I've done a number of interviews, radio interviews, television interviews, and doing another one in Ottawa on Thursday. So that's another way I get the message out. And I have Facebook friends on social media promoting the book as well. And I'm pleased so far, and we'll see how it goes through the summer.
I mentioned to you when we were exchanging emails that this is a book that I read quite quickly. And for me, reading a book quite quickly doesn't happen very often. And I think a lot of it had to do with, in my case, I'm a bit of a news junkie and I like to know what's going on. So I recognize it, names and events that you present, and we're in the same general demographic. And so I'm recognizing a lot of these people. And so it made for a fun time. Let's talk a little bit about your career. And we'll start off with this. So as I'm reading the book, two major partners in your life seem to have come to the fore. One was your dad, Sandy, and the other, your late spouse, Jeanette. And let's start with Dad. And what kind of work did he do? He's from Brockville as well, is he not?
Yeah, he was born in Brockville, spent his whole life as a resident in Brockville, and worked his way up in the newspaper business and became the vice president and managing editor of the Brockville Recorder and Times, which during his time was a very successful daily newspaper in Brockville and beyond, out into the environment surrounding Brockville. And so a newspaper guy, and loved politics. He was something of a backroom guy for both parties, Liberals federally and the Conservatives on the provincial side. And that was a reflection also of the political alignment of the owners of the Brockville paper. And so he would frequently have representatives from either party. On the provincial side, the Conservatives in to talk to him about issues, areas where they were looking for advice or help. And on the federal side, the Liberals, including the MP and the MPPs as well, who were confidants of my dad. And he was really tuned into politics. The mayor was a great friend of his, the mayor of Brockville. So even every level of government, he was a very knowledgeable guy. And talking about politics and some of the individuals' personalities was a frequent topic around the dinner table and even sitting in the living room and our Sunday gatherings, that sort of thing. Politics would inevitably come up. So it was a real learning experience, a real learning opportunity for me, I guess, as a kid growing up.
So what kind of influence would he have had on you as you were growing up?
I think he certainly spurred my interest in politics and looking at politics. And then I had the opportunity to be, not because I was a especially talented writer or anything, but when I was going to high school, I got the opportunity to start covering sports for on a part-time basis for the paper. So I got writing experience, if you will. And then I think it was around 18 years old, and a fellow who'd been the stringer district correspondent for the old Ottawa Journal retired, and he offered me the opportunity. So I gladly accepted, and I would get paid per assignment, if you will. And the desk in the Ottawa Journal would call me and say, "We'd like you to cover this. There's a plane crash here. There was a tornado struck down in Toledo, car accident here." And I would go out and cover those things. And sometimes I'd bring a photographer friend with me. But the big thing in terms of political influence was I got to cover Brockville City Council. So I think that was sort of an added on bonus in terms of my own interest in politics. And it grew from that. I looked at what was going on in that council chamber here. I was a very young guy, but I was intrigued by politics, even at that age. Looking at some of the actors around the council chamber, I said, I think I could do this. I think I could do this job. And that was another inspiration for me.
When you say that politics intrigued you, what was it about politics?
That's a great question. I don't think I've really sat down and tried to analyze that. I think when I was working one summer at the paper, I was having fun with at that point in time was the editorial editor for the editorial page. And this is going back to the Richard Nixon Kennedy presidential race. And during the summer, and the election was in November of that year, 1960. And we just got in chatting, and he was a very staunch Catholic supporting Kennedy. And so I took him on, and I took the opposite side of that argument, took Nixon. And so we debated, we discussed, and he was a really top-notch, very intellectual guy, and great conversations and debates with him. And I think that helped to inspire me as well, David, in terms of generating even more interest in the subject matter and in the people who partake of it. I think it all sort of grew from small things and then getting into that kind of a debate. And then after the election, I bought Theodore H. White, the book, Making the President in 1960, and that was another inspiration for me.
Talk about your time in municipal politics in Brockville, Ontario.
Well, it didn't come easily. I lost my first two elections, and I was 22 and 24. Back then, terms were 2-year terms. And I ran in the East Ward of the city of Brockville, which was a mistake. It wasn't where I lived, but where I had grown up with my family. And I thought that, this might be the best area in terms of opportunity. And I was dead wrong. And I ran there twice and got my butt kicked both times. So I decided to take some time off and did that whole 6-year period between my last defeat and my first election. I think were really important for me in terms of growing as an individual, and I think it ingrained in me a number of perspectives, if you will, that carried me through most of my political career. In that period of time, we lost our almost 2-year-old son to cancer. I became a union president, which is a unique breed in the Conservative Party. I suffered a very serious industrial accident. There were a whole number of things. I helped others to create the Brockville Girls Minor Softball League. I acted as president and as a coach in that league. And in the age of 30, there was an opportunity that arose in the center ward in Brockville. two of the sitting aldermen decided not to run again. There are 3 aldermen per ward in Brockville. And so I thought, well, I'm going to give this another shot. It was my ward where I lived. And in fact, my family had deep roots in that area too, in the center ward. A working class family, mostly a working class area, especially in the downtown core. And I took 2 weeks vacation, campaigned door to door. I think I hit pretty well every door in the ward, and I got elected. And that was the start of a 45-year career.
Now, once you got elected to sit around city council, what sorts of things do you recall that you would label as accomplishments during your time on council?
Yeah, I was lucky. I talk about it in the book, Dave. A lot of luck followed me in my political career. Number one was marrying the lady I married. But the mayor, when I was first elected, was a fellow by the name of John Broome, a true gentleman and a great friend of my dad's. And I was the youngest member of council and a rookie. And I guess he wanted to give me something, so he gave me the chair of a committee that really had nothing to do, but you got the title as chair of the Urban Renewal Committee. And about 3 months after I got that appointment, the federal government announced the Neighborhood Improvement Program, the Residential Rehabilitation Program, millions and millions of dollars. And that the committee I was chairing was assigned responsibility for that. So as a result, and the bulk of those funds were directed into my ward, the old downtown core. So millions and millions of dollars went into that, replacing sidewalks, separating sewers, developing parks, buying historic property for the use of for Brockville Museum to have a permanent home, things like that. And I was holding public meetings all over the ward, public input, ideas and suggestions. So it really dramatically raised my profile from, and there was never anything negative attached to any of those. Those were all good news items. And that's pretty rare in politics when you're consistently getting in the media for good news. So I think that was a big one, certainly my first term, Dave. And I think it helped me going forward because it raised my profile, my name recognition levels, and that always helps in whatever level of politics you're in.
So speaking of levels, at some point you decided that you wanted to move into provincial politics, which is where you spent most of your political career. Right, why step up and decide that you're going to be driving back and forth to Toronto, which it would be a 3-hour drive for you?
3.5 hours. Yeah. I usually took the train. I didn't drive that frequently, certainly not in my early years.
Yeah.
I enjoyed politics. I loved politics. I loved the fact that you could actually accomplish things, measurable things. And, a lot of us in life don't get those kinds of opportunities. And I was given them at the municipal level. And again, my dad's influence, I guess, to some degree, he was a great friend of Jimmy Auld, who was my predecessor, got me involved in the provincial PC party. And so I think it kind of grew from there. And when the opportunity arose that, there can be a lot of people, a lot of my predecessors on council who probably aspired to run provincially and have an opportunity to be the MPP. But you had a sitting member who was a very popular guy, very successful member of the legislature who just didn't choose to retire. And I was, again, when I say Lady Luck, chose to retire when I was pretty much at the peak of my career in municipal politics. So it was, I used to think about when I was working and how I'd love to be doing this job on a full-time basis. And I got the opportunity and made it happen.
I guess in some communities, or I guess in most communities, being a member of city council is not a full-time job. You're doing
No.
something else. But once you get up to the provincial level or the federal level, it is full-time, and you can treat it as such. If you're looking at the overall focus that you thought you had during your time in provincial politics, any particular issues always at the back of your mind?
I guess, upon reflection, I think probably the one I'm perhaps most known and remembered for would be victims of crime. And I was a consistent fighter for victims, and was able to do a lot of things for victims and victims' families when I had the opportunity to be Solicitor General and the Minister of Correctional Services. So I think that's probably what stands out for me. I mean, there are a lot of other, initiatives that not just in the justice area, but when I was consumer minister, a lot of things were accomplished during that brief year and a half in that portfolio. I didn't want to give up, but perhaps the most memorable one for me, and I do talk about it in the book, is gaining access for Ontario ice wines into the European Union. The LCBO was and probably still is the largest importer of European wines in the world. And yet they were shutting our products out of their market. And so I headed a trade mission over to the European Union. We met with folks throughout, France, Belgium, and Great Britain. And went with Andy Brand, who was at that time the chair of the LCBO, and we were a good cop, bad cop routine. And I would be although I was less than diplomatic on one occasion, but most of the time I was a diplomat in the crowd. And Andy would say, if you don't do this, we're not gonna stop importing your products, but we're gonna look at shelf space. Right now, we give you prime shelf space in all of our stores. If we can't get a deal with you on this, you're going down to the bottom shelves.
Yeah.
And I think that was a pretty convincing argument, because this is a wonderful market for their products. And within 3 months, they opened the doors to Ontario Ice.
Another area that seems to have been something that you paid attention to was historical preservation, something you continue to do, and we'll get to that later on. But when you were in the provincial legislature, and then the other issue that I read about in the book too was options for incarceration and the way that youth are incarcerated. And that's just briefly talk about that particular topic, because that was interesting.
I can't take complete credit for this. I was Solicitor General, Minister of Correctional Services, and the announcement had been made that the Brockville Psychiatric Hospital was going to close, and one of the doctors in the Ministry of Corrections came to talk to me, Dr. Humphrey, and really nice fellow. And he suggested, he said, Bob, what's really needed is treatment for mentally ill in the provincial jail system. I mean, I don't know what the percentages would be now, but we know there's significant people suffering varying degrees of mental illness. And the forensic unit for the criminally insane is and was at the Brockville Psych Hospital. And it was the one component that was going to remain on site. It was operated by the Royal Ottawa. And the Dr. Humphrey set up a meeting with me and the CEO of the Royal Ottawa and their chief forensic psychiatrist, by the name of John Bradford. And we started talking about this concept of a secure treatment unit. And it would be radically different from the way inmates getting treatment for mental illness in the federal system are looked after. Radically different. In the federal system, if you're being treated for mental illness, 80% of the staff you're dealing with are guards, correctional service people. 20% medical people. And if there's an incident, the first responders are the correctional. In the system that we were talking about, it would be the correct opposite. 20% correctional, 80% medical. It would be similar to getting treatment in a psychiatric hospital in many ways. And I loved the concept. Took a look at it. We developed plans and comprehensive plans and costs. And then I took them to my colleagues in government and through management board, treasury board, took it to cabinet. And I think, to some degree, my seniority, I was chair of cabinet for all 8.5 years. I think that helps, and got it through. It was $100 million expenditure. And I'm really proud of that facility and the success rate it's had. Mm-hmm. Not one escape, not one death, and really reduced recidivism rates or reoffending rates. And when I was in the Senate, I got into a bit of a fight with the federal people about that, trying to convince them that they should give that a try, but without success. I wasn't happy with the federal people, the way they continued to not recognize the challenges and address them in their own system.
It's interesting to listen to you talk and to read through the book where you're talking about history and thinking about it in terms of what goes on today. The relationship between some of the things like that particular topic and some of the things that you were trying way back when. I talked at the beginning about partners in your success, and if you are going to get into politics and you have a partner in life, then I would think that partner in life has to be on board with the idea of going into politics, because it's not an easy job no matter where you are. And it sounds like Jeanette was a good partner for you.
Better than good. I mean, she was ideal, especially given the career I ended up in. And no, I mean, I was a pretty shy, introverted guy, even though I loved politics and loved the issues. But getting up and speaking, even though I've been a union president, I still had a tough time. Like, I felt to some degree being intimidated by, some of the folks around the table. And but even going into these meetings where I'm kind of a back of the church guy, remain that way in many respects. But Jeanette was a very outgoing and friendly person. She had a fantastic smile that would just light up a room. And it was great to have on my arm and go into a coffee meeting, whatever, political meetings. And she just, you couldn't help but warm up to her immediately. And I see I'm not quite as bad as him, but I watch the U.S. stuff that's going on now with Ron DeSantis, and they're talking about, how Ron DeSantis is so solemn all the time kind of guy. And in a way, people thought I was kind of standoffish, and I'm anything but it was just my shyness, I guess, and it took me a long time to get over, to grow into being a much more comfortable guy in all kinds of situations that you have to deal with as a politician. I see some of these young guys coming up now and getting up and just, rattling off, and gosh, I compare my situation to them, but I was not a natural politician in terms of those kinds of skills, performance skills, I guess is one way to describe it. Mm-hmm. I had to develop over the years, but Jeanette, and I think back on it, Dave, like an MPP, especially in a rural area, has to do a lot of weekend work. You're expected to be at this country fair, this anniversary, this birthday, this ribbon cutting. And it's another unique thing about Jeanette, because I know a lot of my colleagues simply didn't have this advantage that I had, but she would keep me company. Except maybe when the kids were really young, get a babysitter. But she would, if you're doing this all by yourself, and you're doing this country driving up for hours to go to an event, driving back, and you're all by yourself, it's something that wears you down. And even with Jeanette, all the social activities, after I'd been in office around 20 years or so, it really started to wear both of us down. And we made a commitment that we were going to try and keep Sundays to ourselves. We didn't always keep that commitment because there were events that were so special that you couldn't. But for the most part, I think in the last 6-7 years that I was there anyway, we tried to at least keep Sunday free for us. But no, she was, I think, in a lot of, maybe the majority of political lives, a unique spouse. I don't think there's any question about it.
I think you have to share the Michael Douglas story.
Yeah, that was a good one. I was in Toronto. Jeanette was with me in my apartment, and we got a call. I think 5 o'clock or something. We had just getting ready for supper. And it was Julian Fantino, who was the chief of police in Toronto. And he said, "Bob, I'm sorry to call you so late, but we're having a fundraiser for Kids at Risk in Toronto. And the police department in Toronto runs that program." I said, "Would you be interested in coming down?" And we're having a small cocktail party at a hotel. I can't remember the name of the hotel. I said, "Sure." He said, "Michael Douglas is our special guest." I said, "Oh, wonderful."
We're talking the actor here.
Michael Douglas, the movie star.
Yeah.
So I hung up the phone. And Jeanette said, "Who was that?" I said, "Oh, that's Chief Fantino. He wants me to go do this, drop into this cocktail party later. And Michael Douglas is going to be there." Jeanette screams, "Michael Douglas!" I want to go. I want to go. So I phoned the chief back and said, "My wife wants to come." He said, "Oh, of course, bring her along." So we get down there, and the chief takes me right over with Jeanette to meet Michael Douglas, nice guy, and chatting about politics and Ontario politics. We didn't really get into the movie business stuff. But then Jeanette said, "What about a picture? Can we take a picture with you?" And he said, "Well, we're going to do it later. We have a photographer, and we'll be sending them out to him." So we go on and we enjoy the gathering, and then when it comes, there's a few speeches, and at the end of it, we hear this voice yelling, "Jeanette, Jeanette, where's Jeanette?" It was Douglas looking for my wife. So anyway, we went over and we have a couple of really great pictures. One with Jeanette kind of draped all over Michael Douglas, and I joke in the book that they sent them to us. We got them framed, and I said the good thing about it was she didn't hang it over the bed.
One thing I was curious about. So the book is called From Mad Dog to Senator,
Yeah.
and I'd like to know where you got the nickname Mad Dog.
See, nobody's going to want to buy the book, Dave. I'm pulling all these secrets.
Well, I'm not telling them all. There's lots more in here.
Yeah, there is a lot. I'll tell you sort of in a way that it was what I considered at the time a betrayal by a legislative colleague. And it dealt with a very, very serious matter of a murder and an attempted sexual assault in my community. And I was given a guarantee of a vote in a committee, which was failed to happen. And so in the legislature, I was very, very angry, very upset, and got into a shouting match. And some threats thrown back and forth. And ultimately, I was thrown out of the legislature. And so I think, and I'm just guessing this, Dave, that because I deserve to be thrown out of the legislature, but I don't regret being upset and being as passionate as I was about that matter, that issue. But it seemed to originate there. And then when I was a critic in opposition, I was Solicitor General or Justice Critic, and especially dealing with victims again, I would get, quite aggressive and passionate on some occasions. So I think it seemed to go through all of that, but I think the origins were that one time when I felt betrayed by a colleague I liked in another party. And but who'd given me assurances, and then broke them.
You spent 29 years in the legislature. I would imagine that you would have made a lot of friends from amongst the people that you worked with, particularly the elected members, and not necessarily just conservative elected members as well. Any particular names come up that you enjoyed spending time with because of who they were as people?
Peter Cormos was one of my closest friends, and he was NDP, House Leader for the NDP. Funny, witty, super intelligent guy. He dropped out of school, I think, in grade 9 or grade 10, worked hard labor, and then applied to go back to school as a mature student in university, and was accepted and became a lawyer, and an amazing character. And he and I, in our early days, I was in the third party, and he was the critic for auto insurance, and so was I, and that was a hot issue back then. And so we joined together and started doing this road trip tour together, where we'd both, give our cases why auto insurance had to be reformed. He wanted government-run auto insurance, and I would give the private sector options, that kind of thing. And we just became really, really good friends. And he had his 20th anniversary as an MPP. I was asked to attend and represent the Conservative Party, and had a bundle of fun, and announced that I was a former union president. Anybody in the audience could believe it. But it was a fun evening, and of course, every speaker after me addressed me as Brother Runciman, and they had all heavyweights in the union movement in Ontario there. So it was interesting, and I think it helped me with trying to think of the gal. She just gave up the NDP leadership a year or so, but she's now the mayor of Hamilton, Andrea Horwath.
Yeah,
I think it really grew my friendship with Andrea as well, because she hadn't seen that side of me, and we had so much fun that night. Jeanette was with me, and I remember when I was stepping down as interim leader, and she came over across the floor, gave me this huge hug, and then McGiddy, he's get up and says, "I'm not going to give you a hug like that." So, anyway, Peter was. I also spoke at his funeral, and it was just a terrible tragedy, And in any event, he was a great friend, and I think it points to the fact that I'm not sure how much it happens today, but you can have friendships across the aisle, and you can find ways to work together.
And I think, going back to a comment I made earlier, is that those of us who are just watching it from afar don't have the sense that people in opposite parties would be close personal friends, just because of the way party politics seems to have become in the last several years. I won't spill too many more secrets about the book, but I will tell people that if you are into politics, it's particularly in the one area that intrigued me was, and apparently it seemed to be a constant battle between those people that worked for the leader or worked for the campaign, who were not necessarily always on the same wavelength as those other members of that same party who were trying to put forward a particular approach or a particular campaign theme or that sort of thing. There's a bit of that in the book that I found interesting, but I want to speed ahead a little bit here and move toward giving up your time in the Ontario legislature and becoming a senator. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I found interesting, and I never gave it much thought because I just thought that senators showed up to vote on things when bills needed to be passed, and then they went home. But I don't know how common it was for other senators to do what you did, was basically have a constituency office in Brockville. Is that common, or was that common?
No, I don't think it's common today. And I know that it was, for me, there was, I think, two other senators who followed that, one from New Brunswick and one from Newfoundland. And they were both former provincial members. And so I think, my view on it was that having an office, and I had an office, when I call it a constituency office in Brockville, I was an Ontario senator. We didn't, try to confine it to Brockville, but I found it was an excellent opportunity to meet people, deal with federal issues, and in consultation most of the time with my federal colleague who was in the same party, Gord Brown, good friend, and so I just found it hugely advantageous, not just for me, but I had a staffer who was after everything for me in a lot of ways. And it gave him a place to, he lived in Brockville, still does. And it gave him a place to work 5 days a week, if you will. And we worked out of there during breaks when the House wasn't sitting and the Senate wasn't sitting in the winter or in the summer. We worked out of those offices, and I found it enormously advantageous. And so did he, in terms of how he could help in terms of my performance as a senator. And, we got into a lot of issues, and I introduced legislation that we drafted, and we had to go through the clerk's process to make sure that it met all the legal standards and the legislative requirements. But I introduced 4 pieces of legislation. All 4 went through the Senate, passed the Senate, and 3 are now Canadian law. So, I mean, I was only there for 7.5 years. You can talk to a lot of members of Parliament, and they're very lucky if they ever get one of their own bills through a House in their 25-year career. I was able to get 3 done, now Canadian law, in 7.5 years. So I think having that office was a contributor to that. And having an outstanding staff, I had great people working with me, and they made, especially, I'll mention his name, Barry Raisin, who made an enormous difference. Really a treasure to have in my office. There's no question. But I thought I had the best staff on the Hill. I had the best staff on the Hill. Really top-notch, competent, sociable, friendly people. Got along with everybody. Yeah, got things done.
Lots of memories of 45 years in politics. And if that wasn't enough, you're still providing service to your community and to the area around you. And for those of you that are listening to this particular podcast, Brockville is to the east of Kingston, and it is on the St. Lawrence River. And it's a big tourist area, and there's a lot of interest in various tourist sites in this particular area. And there is an outfit that manages those, and it's called the St. Lawrence Parks Commission, and you're the chair of the board of that organization, correct? Still yes, the chair. How many years have you chaired that board?
This I'm into my 4th year. I just renewed for another. I can go for 6 years, and then I could, if I'm up to it, or if they want me around, I can go for another. It's a maximum. You can serve maximum of 9 years on the board, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me. I really enjoy it. I just think, Dave, I could just sit back and put my feet up on the desk, and it's another area where you can actually accomplish things. And again, I've been lucky again, and great staff. The CEO of the Parks Commission, just a tremendous individual, and we are getting things done. It was the parks that have been not given the attention they deserve for the past 40, 50 years. They're now getting it. Browns Bay, for example, which we hope to officially reopen and Civic Holiday weekend, we're putting about $7 million into that. And we're going to do other parks down in the Cornwall area starting next year. We're modernizing campgrounds. We're doing a whole range of things in terms of attracting new business. The Parks Commission also operates the Kingston Pen. They operate Old Fort Henry, Upper Canada Village, a huge number of campgrounds, and day use parks with a marina, the golf course, and an airstrip. So it's quite an operation.
Well, we should tell folks that you operate the Kingston Pen, but it's not a penitentiary. It's a tourist attraction. It was a penitentiary, but it's an awesome place to do a tour. And I have yet to do the tour, and I live in the city of Kingston, but my family has. And they said it's just incredible to go through. And it's become an incredibly a popular tourist attraction. People line up to get in there and buy their tickets. And you never know what's going to be popular, but hats off to you and your group for taking it on and making sure it stays a tourist attraction, at least for the time being. You don't strike me as the kind of guy that would sit with his feet up for any length of time. And the book testifies to that. Again, it's called From Mad Dog to Senator. And I want to thank you for your time and all the best to you. And thank you very much for your service. Dave,
I thank you for giving me this opportunity. Great having this conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Take care.
Okay.
Our guest in this episode has been Bob Runciman, former city councilor, provincial representative, and federal senator, with a total of 45 years of public service. His memoir, From Mad Dog to Senator, is available in several stores and online. Details are available in the liner notes to the episode. To those of you who have taken the time to listen, thank you, and I'll be back soon.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.